Maria Santos had never imagined her life would take such an unexpected turn when she accepted the custodial position at the Naval Special Warfare Command facility in San Diego. At 28 years old, she was a single mother working 2 jobs to support her 8-year-old daughter, Isabella. The Navy base cleaning job paid well enough to let her quit her evening waitressing shift, giving her precious hours to spend with her daughter instead of rushing between restaurants and diners until midnight. Every morning at 5:30, Maria would kiss Isabella's sleeping forehead, leave detailed instructions for the babysitter, and drive her old Honda Civic through the pre-dawn darkness to the heavily guarded gates of the naval facility. The security checks had become routine after 3 months on the job, but she never quite got used to the serious faces of the guards or the way they scrutinized her identification badge with such intensity. The SEAL training facilities were unlike anything Maria had ever encountered. The buildings were imposing structures of concrete and steel, designed for function rather than beauty. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs of fallen heroes, their young faces forever frozen in time, watching over the endless cycles of training and preparation that continued in their honor. Maria had learned to clean around these memorials with extra care, understanding that each image represented someone's son, husband, or father who had given everything for their country. Her supervisor, Janet Miller, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had worked at the facility for over 15 years. Janet had seen countless cleaning staff come and go, but there was something different about Maria that caught her attention from the very beginning. Perhaps it was the way Maria approached her work with genuine respect, never rushing through the job or treating the spaces as just another office building to clean. She understood the weight of the place, the importance of what happened within these walls. The shooting range was Maria's least favorite assignment, though she would never admit this to Janet or anyone else. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the air even hours after training sessions had ended, and the sound of her cleaning cart echoing through the cavernous space always made her feel small and out of place. The range itself was an impressive facility, with multiple lanes stretching far into the distance, sophisticated target systems, and observation areas where instructors could monitor and evaluate performance. On this particular Tuesday morning in late October, Maria arrived at the range earlier than usual. Isabella had woken up with a slight fever during the night, and Maria wanted to finish her work quickly so she could check on her daughter during her lunch break. The range was supposed to be empty until 8 o'clock, giving her plenty of time to complete the thorough cleaning that was required after the previous day's intensive training session. As she pushed her cart through the main entrance, Maria noticed something unusual. Instead of the typical silence that greeted her in the mornings, she could hear voices coming from the far end of the range. Low, urgent conversations that seemed to carry an undercurrent of tension she hadn't experienced before. Maria paused, wondering if she should come back later, but decided to proceed quietly with her work. The cleaning schedule was tight, and she couldn't afford to fall behind. She began her routine methodically, starting with the observation areas and working her way toward the shooting lanes. The voices became clearer as she moved closer, and she could make out at least 3 different people engaged in what sounded like a heated discussion. Maria tried to focus on her work, collecting spent shell casings and wiping down surfaces, but the urgency in their voices was hard to ignore. Admiral Richard Hayes had been commander of the Naval Special Warfare Command for just over 2 years, but his reputation preceded him by decades. At 55, he was a legend among the SEAL community, a man who had led countless missions in some of the world's most dangerous locations. His presence alone commanded respect, and even the most seasoned operators would straighten their postures when he entered a room. Maria had seen him only a few times during her tenure at the facility, always from a distance, always surrounded by his staff and subordinates. This morning, however, Admiral Hayes looked different. As Maria worked her way closer to where the voices were coming from, she caught glimpses of him through the glass partition separating the observation area from the range floor. His usually impeccable uniform was slightly disheveled, his silver hair tousled as if he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. The 2 men with him, both wearing the distinctive uniforms of senior military personnel, appeared equally agitated. Maria tried to make herself invisible as she continued cleaning, but she couldn't help overhearing fragments of their conversation. Words like compromised, immediate threat, and national security drifted through the air, sending chills down her spine. She had always known that important and dangerous work happened at the facility, but hearing it discussed so urgently made it feel suddenly very real and very close. The conversation seemed to center around a training exercise that was scheduled to begin within the hour. Something had gone wrong with their intelligence, something that could put the participating SEALs in serious danger. Admiral Hayes was pacing now, his voice rising slightly as he discussed options with his colleagues. Maria could see the weight of command pressing down on his shoulders, the terrible responsibility of making decisions that could mean the difference between life and death for the men under his command. As Maria moved to clean the area directly adjacent to where the three men were standing, she accidentally knocked over a small container of cleaning solution. The plastic bottle hit the concrete floor with a loud clatter that echoed through the range, immediately drawing the attention of Admiral Hayes and his companions. For a moment, the entire facility seemed to fall silent, and Maria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as three pairs of eyes turned toward her. Admiral Hayes studied her for a moment, his piercing blue eyes taking in her cleaning uniform and the nervous way she was gripping her mop handle. Maria expected him to dismiss her presence with barely a glance, perhaps even ask her to leave while they continued their important discussion. Instead, something shifted in his expression, a look of calculation that she couldn't quite interpret. The Admiral excused himself from his colleagues and walked over to where Maria was standing. Up close, he was even more intimidating than she had imagined. He stood at least 6 feet tall, with the kind of presence that suggested he was accustomed to having his orders followed without question. But, when he spoke to her, his voice was surprisingly gentle. "Excuse me, miss," he said, reading the name tag pinned to her uniform. "Maria, is it? How long have you been working here at the facility?" Maria's mouth felt dry as she tried to form words. "About 3 months, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Admiral Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "And you clean this range every morning?" "Yes, sir. Monday through Friday, usually starting around 6. The Admiral glanced back at his colleagues, who were watching this unexpected interaction with obvious curiosity. Maria could see them exchanging glances, clearly wondering why their commander had suddenly taken an interest in the cleaning staff. "Maria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer," Admiral Hayes said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "In the 3 months you've been working here, have you ever noticed anything unusual? Anyone who didn't belong, anything that seemed out of place or wrong?" The question caught Maria completely off guard. She had expected him to ask her to leave or perhaps to work more quietly, but this was something entirely different. She thought back over the past 3 months, trying to remember if there had been anything that had struck her as odd or concerning. "I don't think so, sir," she said slowly. "Everyone I've seen has had proper identification, and the guards always check people very carefully at the gates." Admiral Hayes studied her face intently, as if trying to read something in her expression. "What about this morning? When you arrived, did you notice anything different about the security procedures or the personnel on duty?" Maria shook her head. "Everything seemed normal, sir. The same guards were at the gate, and they checked my badge just like always." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing something in his mind. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to almost a whisper. "Maria, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to understand how important it is that you don't repeat this to anyone. Can I trust you to keep this conversation confidential?" The seriousness in his voice made Maria's heart race. She nodded quickly, not trusting herself to speak. "We have reason to believe that someone has been gathering intelligence about our training procedures and schedules," Admiral Hayes continued. "Someone who has access to this facility and knows our routines well enough to predict when and where our exercises will take place. This morning's training session may be compromised, which means the lives of my men could be in danger." Maria felt the weight of this revelation settle over her like a heavy blanket. The idea that someone might be working against the very people who risked their lives to protect the country was almost too much to comprehend. "What we need," Admiral Hayes continued, "is someone who can observe the training area without being noticed, someone who would have a legitimate reason to be present but who isn't part of our normal security apparatus. Someone who might notice if anything seems out of place or if anyone appears who shouldn't be there." It took a moment for Maria to realize what he was suggesting. When the implication finally hit her, she felt her knees go weak. "Sir, I'm just a cleaning person," she said quietly. "I don't know anything about military operations or security." Admiral Hayes smiled for the first time since she had encountered him. "That's exactly what makes you perfect for this," he said. "No one pays attention to the cleaning staff. You're practically invisible to most people, which means you can observe without being observed." The two other officers had moved closer during this conversation, and Maria could feel their eyes on her as Admiral Hayes continued to speak. She wondered what they thought about their commander's unusual request, whether they approved of involving a civilian in what was clearly a serious security matter. I understand that this is a lot to ask, Admiral Hayes said. And I want you to know that you can say no. This is not part of your job description, and there could be some element of risk involved. But I also want you to understand that the lives of several very brave young men may depend on having an extra set of eyes and ears during this morning's exercise. Maria thought about Isabella sleeping peacefully at home, blissfully unaware that her mother was being asked to play a role in something that sounded like it belonged in a movie rather than real life. She thought about the photographs of fallen heroes that lined the walls of the facility, and about the families who would never see their loved ones come home again. She thought about the weight of responsibility that Admiral Hayes carried every day, making decisions that could preserve or cost lives. What would I need to do, she heard herself asking, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. Admiral Hayes exchanged a quick glance with his colleagues before answering. Continue with your normal cleaning routine, but pay attention to anyone you see who doesn't seem to belong. Look for people who appear nervous or who seem to be paying too much attention to the training exercise. If you notice anything at all that seems unusual, I want you to find me immediately. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small radio device, no bigger than a cell phone. This is a communication device that will connect you directly to our security team. If you see anything suspicious, press this button and speak clearly into the microphone. Help will be there within seconds. Maria took the device with trembling hands. It felt heavier than it should have, weighted with the responsibility that was being placed on her shoulders. The training exercise will begin at 8 o'clock sharp, Admiral Hayes continued. It's a simulation of a hostage rescue scenario, which means there will be live ammunition and explosive charges being used. The exercise area will be clearly marked, and you should stay well away from those zones. But the observation areas and surrounding facilities will be accessible to you as part of your normal duties. One of the other officers, a man with captain's bars on his collar, stepped forward. Admiral, are you certain about this? Perhaps we should postpone the exercise until we can implement additional security measures. Admiral Hayes shook his head firmly. Captain Morrison, postponing this exercise would signal to whoever is gathering intelligence that we're aware of the threat. That could compromise our ability to identify and capture them. Besides, these men have been preparing for this simulation for weeks. Their deployment depends on successfully completing this training. Captain Morrison nodded reluctantly, but Maria could see the concern in his expression. The third officer, a commander whose name tape read Phillips, was studying Maria with obvious skepticism. With respect, Admiral, Commander Phillips said, are we certain that involving a civilian is the best approach? We have trained security personnel who could handle surveillance duties. Our security personnel are known quantities, Admiral Hayes replied. If there is indeed a security breach, then whoever is responsible will be watching for changes in our normal procedures. Additional security presence would be noticed immediately. But no one pays attention to the cleaning staff. Maria realized that she was holding her breath as the three officers continued their discussion. Part of her hoped that they would decide against involving her, that they would find some other solution that didn't require her to take on responsibilities so far beyond her normal experience. But another part of her, a part that surprised her with its strength, felt honored to be trusted with something so important. Finally, Admiral Hayes turned back to her. Maria, I need a decision. Are you willing to help us? She thought once more about Isabella, about the life she was trying to build for both of them, about the importance of the work that happened within these walls. She thought about the young SEALs who would be participating in the training exercise, men who had dedicated their lives to protecting others, and about their families who waited anxiously for them to come home safely from each mission. Yes, sir, she said quietly. I'll help. Admiral Hayes smiled again, and this time there was genuine warmth in the expression. Thank you, Maria. You may not realize it, but what you're doing today could save lives. As the three officers began discussing the details of the morning's exercise and the security protocols that would be in place, Maria found herself thinking about how dramatically her life had changed in the space of just a few minutes. When she had arrived at work that morning, her biggest concern had been finishing early enough to check on Isabella's fever. Now she was being entrusted with the safety of some of the military's most elite operators. The weight of the radio in her hand served as a constant reminder of the responsibility she had accepted. Admiral Hayes had given her detailed instructions about what to look for and how to report any suspicious activity, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she was completely out of her depth. What if she missed something important? What if her inexperience led to someone getting hurt? As the time for the exercise approached, Maria tried to focus on her normal cleaning routine while simultaneously scanning her surroundings for anything that seemed out of place. The facility was beginning to fill with personnel preparing for the day's activities, and she studied each face, looking for signs of nervousness or suspicious behavior that Admiral Hayes had described. The morning sun was streaming through the high windows of the range, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. In a few minutes, the training exercise would begin, and Maria would find herself playing a role she had never imagined possible. As she gripped the radio tighter in her hand, she whispered a quick prayer for the safety of everyone involved, including herself, and prepared to face whatever the next few hours might bring. The training exercise began precisely at 8 o'clock, just as Admiral Hayes had promised. Maria had positioned herself in the upper observation deck, ostensibly cleaning the windows while maintaining a clear view of both the training area below and the various access points to the facility. The radio felt like a burning weight in her pocket, a constant reminder of the trust that had been placed in her and the potential consequences of failure. Below her, 12 Navy SEALs moved through their hostage rescue simulation with the fluid precision that comes only from years of intensive training. Even through the soundproof glass, Maria could see the intense concentration on their faces as they navigated through the mock building structure that had been erected on the range floor. Their movements were coordinated and purposeful, each man knowing exactly where his teammates were positioned and what his individual role was in the larger operation. Maria found herself genuinely fascinated by the exercise, despite the underlying tension of her surveillance duties. She had never witnessed anything like this before, and the skill and professionalism of the SEALs was truly impressive. They communicated through hand signals and moved with a silence that seemed almost supernatural, appearing and disappearing through doorways and windows like shadows given substance. The hostages in the simulation were actually other military personnel playing their roles with convincing desperation and fear. Even knowing it was a training exercise, Maria found her heart racing as she watched the SEALs methodically clear each room, searching for threats while protecting the innocent people they had been tasked to rescue. For the first hour, everything proceeded exactly as it should have. Maria observed the steady flow of instructors and observers moving through the facility, all of whom displayed proper identification and behaved in ways that seemed completely normal and appropriate. She began to wonder if Admiral Hayes had been overly cautious, if perhaps the intelligence about a security breach had been incorrect or exaggerated. It was just after 9:15 when Maria noticed him. The man appeared to be in his early 30s, wearing the uniform of a Navy lieutenant, but something about him immediately struck Maria as wrong. He moved through the facility with a confidence that suggested familiarity, but his eyes were constantly scanning his surroundings in a way that seemed more nervous than professional. While the other observers were focused on the training exercise below, this man seemed more interested in the layout of the facility itself, the positions of security cameras, and the locations of emergency exits. Maria watched him carefully as he made his way through the observation areas. He carried a clipboard and occasionally made notes, which would have appeared perfectly normal to a casual observer. But Maria noticed that he was writing much more frequently than the other observers, and he seemed to be documenting things that had nothing to do with the training exercise itself. When the man moved to a position near one of the main computer terminals that controlled the range's target systems, Maria felt her anxiety spike. He glanced around to make sure he wasn't being observed, then pulled out what appeared to be a small electronic device and connected it to one of the USB ports on the computer. Maria's hand was on the radio before she even realized she was reaching for it. But then, she hesitated. What if she was wrong? What if the man was supposed to be there, and she was about to embarrass herself and potentially disrupt the training exercise based on nothing more than her own inexperience and overactive imagination? She forced herself to watch more carefully, trying to determine whether her suspicions were justified or simply the product of nerves. The man's behavior continued to seem suspicious to her untrained eye. He was downloading something from the computer system, that much was clear, but Maria couldn't tell whether this was part of his legitimate duties or something more sinister. The decision was taken away from her when the man suddenly looked up and made direct eye contact with her through the glass partition. For a moment, they stared at each other across the room, and Maria saw something in his expression that confirmed all of her worst fears. There was recognition there, and calculation, and something that might have been panic. The man quickly disconnected his device from the computer and began moving toward one of the exit doors. His casual demeanor had completely disappeared, replaced by the urgent movements of someone who knew he had been discovered and needed to escape as quickly as possible. Maria pressed the button on the radio, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage to operate the device. "This is Maria," she said into the microphone, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I think I found him. There's a man in a Navy lieutenant's uniform who was connecting some kind of device to the computer systems. He just saw me watching him and now he's heading toward the east exit." The response was immediate. "Copy that, Maria. Can you give us a more detailed description?" "He's about 5'10", brown hair, clean-shaven. He's wearing a standard Navy uniform with lieutenant's bars. He was carrying a clipboard and some kind of small electronic device. He's moving toward the east stairwell now. We're on our way. Stay where you are and keep watching, but do not attempt to follow or confront him yourself. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Maria watched as the man reached the stairwell door and paused to look back over his shoulder. Even from her position high above the main floor, she could see the tension in his posture. He was clearly debating whether to continue with his planned route or find an alternative way out of the building. The decision was made for him when two security personnel appeared at the opposite end of the observation deck. The man saw them immediately and broke into a run, abandoning any pretense of belonging in the facility. Maria watched in fascination and horror as what had been a routine training exercise suddenly transformed into a real-life pursuit of a suspected spy. Admiral Hayes's voice crackled over the radio. "Maria, this is Admiral Hayes. You did excellent work. The subject is contained within the building and we have security teams moving to intercept. I need you to continue observing from your current position, but stay down and stay safe. There's a possibility that this individual is not working alone." The implications of this statement hit Maria like a physical blow. If there were others, if this was part of a larger operation, then the danger was far from over. She crouched down behind the window ledge, peering carefully over the edge to maintain her surveillance while making herself as small a target as possible. Below her, the SEAL training exercise had been suspended. The participants had been quickly briefed on the security situation and were now assisting with the search for additional threats. Maria watched as they spread out through the facility with the same methodical precision they had demonstrated during the simulation, except now the stakes were real and the target was genuinely dangerous. The man who had been downloading information from the computer systems had managed to evade the initial security response, but Maria could see that his options for escape were rapidly diminishing. The facility was being systematically sealed, with security teams positioning themselves at every possible exit point. Through her radio, Maria could hear the constant chatter of the security teams as they coordinated their search. The language was professional and calm, but she could detect the underlying tension in their voices. This was exactly the kind of security breach that every military facility feared, and the fact that it had occurred during an active training exercise only made it more dangerous. "Target spotted in Section C, Level 2, came a voice over the radio. He's moving toward the auxiliary equipment storage area." "Copy that. Teams 3 and 4 move to block the western corridors. Team 5, take positions at the loading dock area. Do not let him reach the vehicle staging area." Maria realized that she was holding her breath as she listened to the pursuit unfold. The man was clearly familiar with the layout of the facility, moving through areas that would have been difficult for a casual visitor to locate. This suggested that he had been planning this operation for some time, possibly gathering intelligence through multiple visits. Admiral Hayes appeared on the observation deck, moving with the controlled urgency of a man accustomed to crisis situations. He made his way over to where Maria was crouched and knelt down beside her. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "I'm okay, sir. Just scared," Maria admitted. "You should be scared. What you're seeing here is what happens when national security is threatened. But I want you to know that what you did today probably prevented a much more serious breach. That man had access to detailed information about our training schedules, personnel assignments, and operational procedures." As if to emphasize his words, another voice came over the radio. "We've recovered the device he was using. Initial analysis shows he was downloading classified training protocols and personnel files. This could have compromised multiple future operations." Admiral Hayes shook his head grimly. "If those files had made it into the wrong hands, it could have cost lives when these men are deployed in real combat situations." Maria felt a chill run down her spine as she realized just how serious the situation really was. She had thought she was simply helping to catch someone who was spying on a training exercise, But the implications went far beyond anything she had imagined. "Admiral, we have him cornered in the equipment storage area," came an urgent voice over the radio. "But he's threatening to destroy additional evidence if we move in. Request permission to negotiate." "Negative," Admiral Hayes responded immediately. "Do not give him time to destroy anything else. Move in now, but take him alive if possible. We need to know if he was working with others and what information he's already passed along." The radio fell silent for several long minutes, and Maria could only imagine what was happening in the equipment storage area several floors below. She found herself thinking about the SEALs who were involved in the apprehension, young men who had signed up to fight enemies overseas and were now facing a threat within their own training facility. Finally, the radio crackled back to life. "Target is secure. I repeat, target is in custody. No injuries to our personnel. Subject appears to be unconscious but stable." Admiral Hayes closed his eyes for a moment, the relief evident on his face. "Good work, everyone. Maintain security protocols until we can determine if there are additional threats." He turned back to Maria, who was still crouched behind the window ledge. "It's over," he said gently. "You can stand up now." Maria rose to her feet on unsteady legs, her mind still reeling from everything she had witnessed. In the space of just a few hours, she had gone from being an anonymous cleaning person to playing a crucial role in preventing what could have been a catastrophic security breach. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we begin the investigation," Admiral Hayes replied. "We need to find out how this individual gained access to the facility, whether he was working with others, and what information he may have already transmitted to hostile parties. It's going to be a long process." He paused, studying Maria's face carefully. "As for you, I'm afraid your involvement in this situation means that you'll need to be debriefed by our intelligence personnel. They'll want to know exactly what you observed and when. There will also be some additional security protocols you'll need to follow." Maria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. Her quiet life as a single mother working a routine cleaning job had been permanently altered by the events of this morning. "I want you to know," Admiral Hayes continued, "that what you did today was extraordinary. You showed courage, good judgment, and genuine concern for the safety of others. Those are qualities that can't be taught, and they're exactly what we need in the people who support our operations." As the immediate crisis subsided, Maria found herself thinking about Isabella, who was probably feeling better by now and wondering why her mother hadn't called to check on her as promised. She thought about how she would explain this day to her daughter, how she would make sense of her own transformation from invisible custodian to someone entrusted with protecting national security. The training exercise that had been interrupted by the security breach was officially cancelled, and the SEALs who had participated were being briefed on the real-world implications of what had occurred. Maria watched them through the window, noting how their demeanor had changed from the professional focus of a training simulation to the heightened awareness that comes with exposure to genuine danger. Admiral Hayes was called away to deal with the various administrative and security issues that would arise from the incident, but before he left, he handed Maria a business card. "This has my direct contact information," he said. "I want you to call me immediately if anything unusual happens over the next few days, anything at all. And I want you to be extra careful about your personal security. Until we know more about this individual and his associates, we have to assume that anyone connected to this facility could be a target." The weight of this warning settled over Maria like a heavy cloak. She had been so focused on the immediate drama of catching the spy that she hadn't considered the possibility that her involvement might put her own safety, or Isabella's, at risk. As the facility slowly returned to normal operations, Maria completed her cleaning duties with a newfound awareness of her surroundings. Every face was scrutinized, every sound analyzed for potential threat. The invisible anonymity that had made her perfect for surveillance work now felt like a vulnerability, a reminder that she had stepped out of the shadows and into a world where actions had consequences that extended far beyond her personal experience. The radio that Admiral Hayes had given her remained clipped to her belt, a tangible reminder that her role in this story was far from over. As she pushed her cleaning cart through the corridors that had been the scene of such intense drama just hours before, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that her life had been fundamentally changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. 3 days after the incident at the SEAL facility, Maria's life had taken on an entirely different rhythm. She still arrived at work at the same time each morning, still went through the security checkpoints with her identification badge, but now the guards knew her by name. Word had spread through the facility about the cleaning woman who had helped catch a spy, and Maria found herself receiving respectful nods and genuine smiles from personnel who had previously looked right through her. The debriefing sessions with military intelligence had been more intense than Maria had anticipated. For hours, she had been questioned about every detail of her observations, every aspect of the suspicious man's behavior, every moment of their brief eye contact. The interrogators were professional but thorough, clearly understanding that the smallest detail might provide crucial insight into a larger security threat. During these sessions, Maria learned more about the severity of what had occurred. The man she had identified was Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, a decorated naval officer with 12 years of exemplary service. His transformation from trusted insider to security threat had shocked everyone who knew him, including the intelligence personnel who were now trying to understand how and why it had happened. The device Mitchell had been using to download classified information was sophisticated enough to suggest professional training and support. The intelligence analysts believed he had been recruited by a foreign intelligence service, though the exact timeline and method of his recruitment remained unclear. Most troubling of all, the investigation had revealed that Mitchell had accessed classified information on multiple occasions over the past 6 months, suggesting that significant damage had already been done to national security. Admiral Hayes had personally overseen Maria's security arrangements. Her home address had been quietly added to regular patrol routes, and sophisticated security monitoring had been installed around her apartment building. Isabella remained unaware of these precautions, though she had noticed that her mother seemed more anxious than usual and had started checking the locks on their door multiple times each evening. On Thursday morning, as Maria was cleaning the administrative offices adjacent to the main training facilities, Admiral Hayes approached her with an expression she hadn't seen before. There was something almost hesitant in his manner, as if he was struggling with a decision that had been weighing on his mind. "Maria, I need to discuss something with you," he said quietly, gesturing toward his private office. "Would you have a few minutes?" Following him into the office, Maria was struck by the personal touches that humanized the space. Photographs of Admiral Hayes with various military units, commendations and awards from a distinguished career, and, prominently displayed on his desk, a picture of a young woman in a Navy uniform who bore a strong resemblance to the Admiral himself. "My daughter, Lieutenant Sarah Hayes," he said, noticing Maria's gaze. "She's currently deployed with a SEAL support unit in the Pacific. Everything we do here, every security measure we implement, every precaution we take, has a personal dimension for those of us whose children serve." He gestured for Maria to take a seat in one of the chairs facing his desk. The formality of the setting made her nervous, and she wondered if she had somehow done something wrong during the debriefing process. "The investigation into the Mitchell case has revealed some disturbing developments," Admiral Hayes began. "We've discovered that his access to classified information was more extensive than we initially realized. He had been systematically gathering intelligence about SEAL training procedures, deployment schedules, and operational protocols for months before you identified him." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. The idea that someone had been stealing secrets for so long while appearing to be a loyal officer was deeply unsettling. "More concerning," Admiral Hayes continued, "is what we've learned about his motivation." During his interrogation, Mitchell revealed that his daughter had been kidnapped while studying abroad in Eastern Europe. The kidnappers demanded that he provide classified information in exchange for her safe return. The personal dimension of Mitchell's betrayal hit Maria like a physical blow. She thought about Isabella sleeping safely at home, and tried to imagine the impossible choice that Mitchell had faced between his duty to his country and his love for his child. "We've since learned that Mitchell's daughter was never actually kidnapped," Admiral Hayes said quietly. "She was recruited by the same intelligence service that was running her father, and the entire kidnapping scenario was an elaborate deception designed to give Mitchell a justification for his betrayal that would be psychologically acceptable to him." Maria struggled to process this information. The complexity of the operation, the psychological manipulation involved, suggested a level of sophistication that was almost beyond her comprehension. "What we still don't know," Admiral Hayes continued, "is whether Mitchell was the only person they recruited within our facility. The intelligence service that was running him is known for its preference for networks rather than individual assets. We have to assume that there may be others." The implication of his words was clear, and Maria felt her anxiety spike. "Are you saying that there might be more spies in the facility?" "It's a very real possibility," Admiral Hayes confirmed. "Which brings me to why I asked you here today. The success you had in identifying Mitchell has led us to consider expanding your role in our security operations." Maria's mouth fell open. The idea that they would want her to continue surveillance activities was something she hadn't even considered. "I understand that this is far beyond what you signed up for when you took this job," Admiral Hayes said. "And I want to be completely transparent about what we would be asking of you. The work would be dangerous, it would require extensive additional training, and it would necessarily involve some deception regarding your actual role at the facility." He leaned back in his chair, studying her face carefully. "On the other hand, you've demonstrated natural aptitude for observation and analysis, and you have the perfect cover identity. No one suspects the cleaning staff of being involved in intelligence work." Maria's mind was reeling. The practical considerations alone were overwhelming. What about Isabella? What about my regular job? I can't afford to lose the income from cleaning work. Those are all legitimate concerns, Admiral Hayes acknowledged. If you were to accept this expanded role, your compensation would be significantly increased to reflect your additional responsibilities. As for your daughter, she would become part of our family support network, with access to enhanced security protection and educational opportunities. The mention of educational opportunities caught Maria's attention. She had been worried about being able to afford to send Isabella to college, and the idea that accepting this role might provide better opportunities for her daughter was powerfully appealing. "I need to think about this," Maria said slowly. "This is such a big decision, and it would affect both of our lives so dramatically." "Of course," Admiral Hayes said. "Take all the time you need. But I do want you to understand the larger context of what we're dealing with here. The intelligence that Mitchell was able to gather has already been used to compromise at least 2 overseas operations. American lives have been lost because of the information he provided to foreign intelligence services." The weight of this revelation settled over Maria like a heavy blanket. The abstract concept of national security had suddenly become very personal and very real. "There's something else you should know," Admiral Hayes continued. "The psychological profile we've developed of the intelligence service that recruited Mitchell suggests that they're likely to attempt to recruit additional assets within our facility. They've invested too much time and effort in this operation to simply abandon it because Mitchell was caught." Maria understood the implication. Even if she chose not to accept the expanded role that was being offered, she would likely remain a target for recruitment attempts by hostile intelligence services. Her involvement in exposing Mitchell had made her a person of interest to people she had never imagined existed. "What kind of training would be involved?" she asked, surprising herself by asking the question. "You would learn basic surveillance techniques, communication protocols, and threat assessment procedures," Admiral Hayes explained. "You would also receive training in personal security and self-defense. The goal would be to make you as effective as possible while minimizing the risks to your safety." He opened a folder on his desk and removed several documents. "These are some of the materials you could review if you're seriously considering this option. They would give you a better understanding of what the work would actually involve." Maria accepted the documents with trembling hands. The folders were marked with classification stamps and warnings about unauthorized disclosure, reminders that she was stepping into a world with rules and consequences far removed from her previous experience. "There's one more thing," Admiral Hayes said. "If you accept this role, you would be working directly for me. Your real job would be to serve as an early warning system, someone who could identify potential security threats before they have a chance to do significant damage. Given what we now know about the sophistication of the threats we're facing, having someone in that position could be the difference between catching the next Mitchell early and discovering another catastrophic breach after it's too late." As Maria left Admiral Hayes's office with the classified documents hidden in her cleaning supply bag, her mind was spinning with the magnitude of the decision she faced. On one hand, accepting this role would provide financial security for her family and potentially exciting opportunities for personal growth. On the other hand, it would place both her and Isabella in a world of danger and deception that she was not sure she was prepared to handle. That evening, as she helped Isabella with her homework and listened to her daughter chatter about her day at school, Maria found herself studying every person who passed by their apartment window. She noticed cars that seemed to park for too long on their street, and found herself checking the locks on their door multiple times throughout the evening. The classified documents remained unread in her bedroom, a constant reminder of the choice that lay before her. She had been given a week to make her decision, but already she could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Late that night, after Isabella had gone to bed, Maria sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Just a week ago, her biggest concern had been whether she could afford to buy Isabella new shoes before the start of the school year. Now she was being asked to consider a role that could potentially save American lives or, if she failed, contribute to their loss. The ringing of her telephone broke through her contemplation. At first she considered not answering, given the late hour, but something compelled her to pick up the call. "Hello," she said cautiously. "Maria Santos?" The voice was unfamiliar, with a slight accent she couldn't identify. "Who is this?" Maria asked, her anxiety spiking immediately. "My name is not important," the voice continued. "What is important is that we know about your recent activities at the naval facility. We know about your conversation with Admiral Hayes. We know about the offer he made to you." Maria's hands began to shake as the implications of the call became clear. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do," the voice said calmly. "And we want you to know that accepting Admiral Hayes' offer would be a very serious mistake. Your daughter Isabella attends Roosevelt Elementary School. She walks home alone 3 blocks from the bus stop. She stops at the corner market to buy candy on Fridays when you give her allowance money." The blood drained from Maria's face as she realized that these people had been watching her family, studying their routines, preparing for this exact conversation. "If you're threatening my daughter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'll call the police." "That would be unfortunate for everyone involved," the voice replied. "We're not threatening anyone, Maria. We're simply making you aware of realities that you may not have considered. You have stumbled into a situation that is much larger and more complex than you understand." The caller paused, letting the weight of his words settle over her. "Admiral Hayes has offered you a role in intelligence work, but he hasn't told you about the casualties. He hasn't told you about the agents who have been killed or disappeared because they became too visible to the wrong people. He hasn't told you about the families who have been destroyed because someone made the wrong choice at the wrong time." Maria felt sick to her stomach as she listened to these words. The exciting opportunity that Admiral Hayes had presented was beginning to look like a trap from which there might be no escape. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "We want you to make the smart choice," the voice said. "Decline Admiral Hayes' offer. Return to your normal life. Focus on being a good mother to Isabella. Some opportunities are too dangerous to accept, and this is one of them." The line went dead, leaving Maria staring at the telephone in her hand. Outside her apartment window, the street looked exactly the same as it always had, but now she knew that hidden in that normalcy were people watching her every move, people who knew where her daughter went to school and how she spent her allowance money. The classified documents in her bedroom seemed to be calling to her, demanding that she read them and understand exactly what she was being asked to consider. But now, after the phone call, Maria wasn't sure she wanted to know the details of a world that included threats against 8-year-old children who had done nothing more than have a mother in the wrong place at the wrong time. As she sat in her darkened kitchen, Maria realized that her decision had become much more complicated than a simple choice between maintaining her current life and accepting an exciting new opportunity. Now it was a choice between the safety of her daughter and the possibility of serving something larger than herself. And, for the first time since this whole adventure had begun, Maria wasn't certain which choice was the right one. Maria spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, her mind racing between the opportunities that Admiral Hayes had presented and the chilling threat she had received over the telephone. By morning, she had come to a realization that surprised her with its clarity: she could not make this decision based on fear alone. If she allowed herself to be intimidated by faceless threats, she would be abandoning not only her own potential but also her responsibility to the brave men and women who risked their lives to protect others. When she arrived at work the next morning, Maria carried herself differently. There was a new determination in her posture, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. She had spent the dawn hours reading through the classified documents that Admiral Hayes had given her, and what she had learned had only strengthened her resolve. The materials had revealed the true scope of the intelligence threat facing military facilities across the country. Mitchell's case was not an isolated incident, but part of a coordinated campaign by foreign intelligence services to gather information about American military capabilities and operational procedures. The documents described successful recruitment operations targeting everyone from senior officers to maintenance personnel, painting a picture of a shadow war being fought within the very institutions designed to protect national security. What had particularly struck Maria was a section describing the psychological profiles of successful intelligence assets. The most effective recruits were often people who felt invisible or undervalued in their current roles, people who were looking for recognition or significance in their lives. Maria realized that this described her own situation perfectly, and she wondered if her recruitment by Admiral Hayes had been as carefully calculated as Mitchell's recruitment by hostile forces. But, rather than feeling manipulated, this knowledge empowered her. Understanding the game being played meant that she could choose her role in it consciously and deliberately. She was not going to be a pawn moved around by forces beyond her control, whether those forces were American or foreign. Admiral Hayes was waiting for her in his office when she arrived for their scheduled meeting. He seemed to sense immediately that something had changed in her demeanor, and he studied her face carefully as she took her seat across from his desk. "You've made your decision," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir, I have," Maria replied. "But first, I need to tell you about something that happened last night." She described the threatening phone call in detail, watching Admiral Hayes's expression grow increasingly grim as she recounted the caller's knowledge of Isabella's school routine and their implicit threats against her safety. "I should have anticipated this," Admiral Hayes said when she finished. "The fact that they moved so quickly to attempt intimidation confirms our assessment that Mitchell was part of a larger network. They're clearly desperate to prevent you from accepting our offer." He reached for his phone and made a brief call, speaking in the kind of military shorthand that Maria was beginning to understand. Within minutes, two men in civilian clothes appeared at his office door. "Maria, these are Special Agents Johnson and Rodriguez from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. They're going to be coordinating enhanced security measures for you and Isabella, regardless of what decision you make about our offer." Agent Johnson, a tall man with prematurely gray hair, stepped forward. "Mrs. Santos, we've already begun implementing protective protocols around your home and your daughter's school. The threats you received last night were serious, but we want you to know that we take the safety of our personnel and their families very seriously." "What does that mean, exactly?" Maria asked. "It means that Isabella will have discreet protection during her school hours, and that your apartment building is now under constant surveillance," Agent Rodriguez explained. "It also means that we'll be providing you with enhanced communication devices and emergency protocols." Admiral Hayes leaned forward in his chair. "Maria, I want to be completely honest with you about something. The moment you helped us identify Mitchell, you became a target. Whether you accept our offer of expanded responsibilities or not, you're now part of this conflict. The question is whether you want to be a passive victim or an active participant." The bluntness of his statement was sobering, but Maria found that it clarified her thinking rather than confusing it. "Sir, I've decided to accept your offer. But I have some conditions." Admiral Hayes raised his eyebrows, clearly not having expected this response. "I'm listening." "First, I want complete transparency about the risks involved. No sugarcoating, no protecting my feelings. If this job might get me killed, I want to know that up front." "Understood," Admiral Hayes replied. "Second, I want Isabella to be involved in age-appropriate discussions about our security situation. She's smart enough to sense that something has changed, and I think it's better for her to know the truth than to let her imagination fill in the blanks." Agent Johnson nodded approvingly. "That's actually consistent with our recommendations. Children often handle the truth better than adults expect, especially when it's presented properly." "Third," Maria continued, "I want to understand exactly what happened to Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's daughter. If I'm going to be effective at this work, I need to understand how these people operate." Admiral Hayes exchanged a glance with the NCIS agents before answering. Mitchell's daughter, Yema, was a graduate student in international relations at a university in Prague. She was recruited by intelligence operatives who posed as fellow students interested in her father's military career. Over several months, they developed a romantic relationship with her and gradually convinced her to provide information about her father's work. He paused, allowing Maria to process this information. When the romance had served its purpose, they staged the fake kidnapping that was used to coerce Mitchell into betraying his country. Emma was complicit in the deception from the beginning. The psychological complexity of the operation was staggering. Maria tried to imagine the kind of training and patience required to execute such an elaborate manipulation. "What happened to Emma after Mitchell was captured?" Maria asked. "She disappeared," Agent Rodriguez said quietly. "We believe she was extracted to a non-extradition country where she's probably being debriefed about everything she learned during the operation." The implications were clear and chilling. The people who had threatened Maria last night were part of an organization capable of turning children against their own parents, of destroying families in service of their intelligence objectives. When do we start? Maria asked. Admiral Hayes smiled for the first time since the meeting had begun. We start now. Agent Johnson is going to accompany you home to brief Isabella and implement the immediate security measures. Agent Rodriguez will begin your basic training this afternoon. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. Maria found herself learning about surveillance detection techniques, secure communication protocols, and threat assessment procedures. The training was intensive but fascinating, and she was surprised by how quickly she was able to absorb the information. Agent Rodriguez turned out to be an excellent instructor, patient but demanding, always pushing her to think more critically about her observations and assumptions. The key to successful intelligence work, he explained, is learning to see patterns that others miss. You've already demonstrated that ability by identifying Mitchell when trained security personnel missed the signs. Meanwhile, Agent Johnson had proven remarkably skilled at explaining the situation to Isabella in terms that were honest but not frightening. By the time Maria returned home that evening, her daughter had accepted the presence of special police as a temporary necessity and had even expressed excitement about the security measures. Mama, Isabella said as they sat down for dinner, Agent Johnson says that you're helping to catch bad guys who want to hurt soldiers. Is that true? Maria looked into her daughter's earnest brown eyes and felt a surge of pride. Yes, baby, that's true. There are people who try to get information that could be used to hurt the brave men and women who protect our country. My job is to help stop them. Are you going to be in danger? Isabella asked with the directness that only children possessed. There might be some danger, Maria said carefully. But there are very smart people working to keep us safe. And the work I'm doing might help protect other families like ours. Isabella considered this seriously. Like the families of the soldiers? Exactly like that. Over the following weeks, Maria's life settled into a new routine that was both familiar and entirely different from her previous existence. She still arrived at the naval facility each morning with her cleaning supplies, still moved through the buildings performing custodial duties. But now her real job was observation and analysis, watching for patterns and behaviors that might indicate security threats. The training continued during her off hours, covering everything from basic self-defense to advanced psychological profiling. Maria discovered that she had a natural aptitude for reading people, for detecting the subtle signs of stress or deception that might indicate hostile intent. Admiral Hayes had been right about her cover identity being perfect. No one questioned the presence of a cleaning woman, and people continued to speak freely around her as if she were invisible. But now Maria was listening with trained ears, watching with educated eyes, looking for the kinds of details that might prevent another Mitchell from succeeding. 3 months into her new role, Maria identified her second potential security threat. This time it was a civilian contractor who had been using his access to the facility's computer networks to gather information about upcoming training exercises. The investigation revealed that he had been recruited through online gaming communities, an increasingly common vector for intelligence operations targeting younger Americans. 6 months later, she helped identify a sophisticated surveillance operation that was being conducted by individuals posing as reporters researching a story about military training procedures. The operation had been so well planned that it might have succeeded if Maria hadn't noticed inconsistencies in their behavior during multiple visits to the facility. Each success built her confidence and reinforced her sense that she was making a meaningful contribution to national security. The work was challenging and sometimes stressful, but it was also deeply satisfying in ways that her previous jobs had never been. Isabella thrived under the new circumstances as well. The enhanced security measures had initially seemed intrusive, but they had quickly become part of the background of their lives. More importantly, the educational opportunities that came with Maria's new position had opened doors that would never have been available otherwise. Isabella was now attending a specialized school with advanced programs in mathematics and science, and she was already talking about wanting to become an engineer when she grew up. One afternoon, as Maria was reviewing her surveillance notes from the previous week, Admiral Hayes stopped by her desk in the small office she had been assigned near the main administrative complex. "I wanted to check in and see how you're adjusting to everything," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "It's been challenging, but in the best possible way," Maria replied honestly. "I feel like I'm finally doing work that matters, work that uses capabilities I didn't even know I had." Admiral Hayes nodded with satisfaction. That's exactly what we hoped would happen. You've exceeded every expectation we had, and your success has led us to consider expanding this program. We're looking at recruiting other personnel in similar positions at facilities across the country. The idea that her experience might serve as a model for a larger program was both exciting and humbling. Maria thought about other single mothers working custodial jobs, wondering if any of them might have similar aptitudes for intelligence work that were being wasted in routine employment. There's something else I want to discuss with you, Admiral Hayes continued. We've been offered an opportunity to participate in a joint operation with Allied intelligence services. It would involve identifying and tracking foreign operatives who are targeting military facilities in multiple countries. The scope of what he was describing was far beyond anything Maria had previously imagined. What would my role be in something like that? You would serve as a liaison and consultant, sharing the techniques and insights you've developed here. The work would involve some travel, probably to NATO facilities in Europe, and it would represent a significant step forward in your career. Maria felt a familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension. Each opportunity that arose seemed to pull her further into a world she was still learning to navigate, but the chance to contribute to international security cooperation was compelling. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course, Admiral Hayes replied. But I want you to know that recommendations for this kind of assignment don't come around often. The fact that it's being offered to someone with your background and experience level is virtually unprecedented. That evening, as Maria helped Isabella with her science homework and listened to her daughter explain the intricacies of her latest project, she reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed. The scared single mother who had been sweeping the SEAL range just over a year ago had evolved into a trusted intelligence professional whose expertise was being sought by international allies. The threats that had initially terrified her had never materialized into actual violence, though the enhanced security measures remained in place as a precautionary measure. The hostile intelligence operatives who had attempted to intimidate her had apparently decided that direct confrontation with American security services was too risky to pursue. But, more importantly, Maria had discovered reserves of strength and capability within herself that she had never suspected existed. The work had challenged her intellectually and emotionally in ways that had led to genuine personal growth and development. Mama, Isabella said, looking up from her homework, Agent Rodriguez says that you're helping to protect people all over the world now. Is that true? I hope so, baby, Maria replied. I'm learning how to do work that helps keep people safe. It's not always easy, but it's important. I'm proud of you, Isabella said with the simple sincerity that only children could manage. Looking at her daughter, Maria realized that she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. The invisible cleaning woman had discovered her own significance, her own capacity to contribute to something larger than herself. The mop and bucket that had once defined her entire professional identity had been replaced by skills and responsibilities that connected her to a global network of people dedicated to protecting freedom and security. Admiral Hayes had been right when he said that some opportunities are too important to pass up, even when they involve risk and uncertainty. The scared woman who had accepted his original offer had evolved into someone capable of handling international responsibilities, someone whose insights and abilities were valued by the highest levels of military leadership. As she tucked Isabella into bed that night, Maria made her decision about the international assignment. Tomorrow she would tell Admiral Hayes that she was ready for the next challenge, ready to take her unique combination of skills and experience to an even larger stage. The journey that had begun with a simple cleaning job had taught her that sometimes the most extraordinary opportunities come disguised as ordinary circumstances. Sometimes being invisible is exactly what allows you to see clearly, and sometimes the most important work is done by people who never intended to be heroes but who choose to act with courage when courage is needed. The rifle that Admiral Hayes had urgently handed her that first morning had been metaphorical, but Maria had learned to carry it with confidence and skill. She was no longer just sweeping the SEAL range, she was helping to guard the very foundations of freedom itself.